Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and we have another complete set presentation. This time I'm taking you back to the last year of the Topps Monopoly. I'm taking you back to 1980. So without further ado, here is the 1980 Topps Complete Baseball Set. 726 cards, all released in one series. All right, so the basic design, as you can see, is pretty much captured with the very first cards, which are the highlight cards. We have the lovely banner at the top, which will have position on position players. For the highlights, obviously, they have the years, which was previously the 1979 season. And then there's a little banner below that has a team name. It's a very similar design to 1977. What makes this stand out differently also is it has blue cardstock on the back and also reintroduces the cartoon and drops the trivia game that you saw in some of the previous years. So I'll go through the set again, talk a little bit about the 1980 season, and point out some of the key cards as we go through the set. The set obviously is most noted for the rookie card of Rickey Henderson, so I'll point that out when we get to it. But there's also some other big name cards in here, and we'll talk about some of the seasons that those players had and why it was significant. So we'll start out with the highlight cards, and we have the highlights of both Brock and Yastrzemski hitting 3,000 hits in a season in '79. Here's McCovey setting a home run record for NL lefties at 512 at that time. Here we have Pete Rose, 10th season of 200 hits or more. All right, and we move forward now. Got El Presidente, Denny Martinez, Hall of Famer Bruce Sutter. I just love the simplicity of this design. It was one of my favorite designs from the 1980s by far. It probably is my favorite one from the 1980s, that or maybe 1983, which is another set we haven't done yet. Actually see the 1980 uniforms here are in full bloom by the time this set is released. Good old Vita Blue up here. Love the old Pirates uniforms from the 70s and 80s here. Got good old Louis Tiant with the New York Yankees at that point. We got Carlton Fisk, shortly before he became a White Sox. Here's our very first All-Star cards. You can see that they have the regular player card image, plus they list on there if they were an AL or an All-Star based on what league they are. And Frank White is the first one that we see here, who's somebody I think probably should be considered for the Hall of Fame. And then we have our team cards here where they have the manager in the top, which was a very common characteristic of the late '70 design, where the manager was included in the team photo. It wasn't a separate card. J.R. Richard had a very unfortunate end to this season. He had a stroke towards the end of the year when he was trying to come back from another injury that was related to his cardiovascular health, and he never pitched again after this season. That's probably what's most noted about him during the 1980 set, and it's a very unfortunate thing. We got Bill Madlock and good old Bobby Valentine up here in the corner. Bucky frickin' Dent. Gary Carter, pretty cool image of him. Go through these pretty quickly here. David Steve was a good pitcher during this time. Here we got an all-star of Ted Simmons, Hall of Famer right there. Johnny Bench, still doing well at this point in his career. Fred Lynn, an all-star. Tony La Russa with the White Sox here still. Old Greg Levinsky up there in the corner. Tony Perez with the Expos. Old Bill Buckner down here in the corner. The Goose Gossage. Before he had his characteristic mustache going on there. So the regular season of 1980 had a couple different highlights. One being Nolan Ryan actually reached his 300th strikeout for a career, which was only the fourth pitcher to be able to reach 3,000 strikeouts. Steve Carlton also had a pretty significant strikeout record. He actually set the major league record for most strikeouts by a left-hander, which was set just a few years before by Mickey Lolich. But without question, probably the 1980 season, here's Eddie Murray down here, second-year card for him, was mostly known for the 400 chase by George Brett. He actually finished the season with 390, but was actually batting 400 well into early part of September, but just had a hard time being able to hold it on. And it's been the highest single season average, I think, since then. I think maybe during the strike shortened season, I think that Glenn may have batted 394, if I'm not mistaken. We got Tim Carver towards the end of his career here. Bobby Cox up here managing the Braves. I think this was the first time he managed the Braves. He went on to do Toronto for a little while. We've got Jim Rice up here, an all-star there. And then we have our league leaders. So we're going to have definitely some Hall of Famers that are listed in here. We got Dave Winfield, Phil Niekro, Nolan Ryan, got Steve Carlton, who I mentioned earlier. Speaking of the Phillies, in 1980, they won the National League East Division by 1 game over the Montreal Expos and went on to face, at that time, the Houston Astros. And that ended up going to a 5-game playoff series, and they won it 3-2 and advanced to the World Series, in which they played the Kansas City Royals, who won the West Division but swept the Yankees during the playoff series. So they went head-to-head during the World Series, and this was the World Series where you see Tug McGraw throwing his mitt up in the air. It was the first World Series ever for the Philadelphia Phillies. So that was probably one of the big things the season was noted for, was them winning the World Series 4-2. Some other things that happened that year, here's Lou Piniella, was the season actually had a strike during spring training for 8 days. It didn't delay the start of the season, but it definitely kind of foreshadowed the strike that followed the following year, where actually the season was interrupted. Here we got 2 Hall of Famers. We got Alan Trammell and also Dave Winfield. Sorry about the noise there. I think my cat's trying to break in. We have Andre Dawson. Probably don't need her running in front of the camera and knocking it over during this. Phil Niekro. Jim Cott with the Yankees. Dusty Baker. Joe Torre managing the Mets. Al Oliver, someone I think who should be in the Hall of Fame. Robin Yount. Mike Schmidt, who was your National League MVP. The American League MVP was George Brett. Definitely, if you bat .390 in a season, you probably should be on the short list for MVP candidates. And the Cy Young Award winners, I already mentioned Steve Carlton was your National League one, but Steve Stone actually won the AL Cy Young Award during that season, who's still actually active as not as a player, but as a color commentator for the Chicago White Sox right now. So I had that game on here shortly before I jumped on. Our Rookies of the Year were actually, one guy I don't know much about. It was Joe Charbonneau. I could be pronouncing that wrong, with the American League. And then Steve Howe, who had a lot of off-the-field problems, who kept him kind of missing a lot of regular season games because of suspension. Steve Howe was your NL Rookie of the Year. Good old Dale Murphy there. I always like that picture of him. Gaylord Perry. I like the close-ups on these cards, so we can get the full image of like their faces. Here's Bruce Bochy, a young Bruce Bochy. We got Steve Garvey, 2 guys that are in the news. Obviously, Bruce Bochy won the World Series, and Steve Garvey's trying to win, I believe, a Senate position, if I'm not mistaken. Good old Ron Guidry off of his great season the year before. We got Tommy Lasorda with the Dodgers. Actually, may have been 2 years before. I think it was 78. Dave Parker just got his autograph a couple weeks ago in person. Dennis Eckersley. Good old Keith Hernandez. Gene Mouch. Willie McCovey. This is actually last season as a player. Lou Whitaker. Someone I think should be in the Hall of Fame too. Jack Morris, almost missed him. Fergie Jenkins up here in the corner. Ozzie Smith. Earl Weaver. Let me move the cat. And the cat just jumped up on the counter. Might be everyone's favorite part of the video. She jumped in here. I'm going to move you out here just for a little bit. Sorry about that. Let me continue. We got a chance to enjoy the cards that were on this page. Good old George Foster there. Earl Weaver. Paul Molitor. Good old Bobby Bonds there. Dick Howser managing the Yankees before he moved over to the Royals and won the World Series later in '85. Don Sutton. George Brett, as I mentioned, that's a pretty famous card of his because of that season. Burt Bryleven. Good old Willie Randolph, someone who I think also needs to be reconsidered for the Hall of Fame. Dick Williams, Hall of Fame manager. Here's the Rickey Henderson rookie. If I had that graded, it probably wouldn't grade much higher than a 4. It's okay, it's perfect for a binder. George Brett's brother, Ken. So the Hall of Fame voting for this year, that's started off in January. You had actually 4 Hall of Famers that got in. 2 by vote, which were Duke Schneider and Al Kaline, and 2 by the veteran committees, which were Chuck Klein and Tom Yawkey. Willie Horton at the end of his career with the Mariners. Pete Rose. Rick Sutcliffe's rookie card, actually. Good old Ken Griffey. Chuck Tanner up in the corner there. The Pirates. Bud Harrelson towards the end of his career. More famous as a Met. Nolan Ryan, right before he went to Houston. In that picture. Jim Palmer. Reggie. Such a cool image of Reggie. I think any of the images of him in a full, and his follow through and his swing just look awesome. Here's Pop Stargell. Sparky Anderson. Good old Larry Boa as an all-star. There's a cat. Move the cat. Move this. Joe Morgan, Raleigh Fingers, who also I got an autograph from recently. And then you have your future stars, which are very similar from the previous years. This time they're color images, which I believe the previous years were not. There's a couple guys of note that had decent careers, but there's no Hall of Famers amongst these guys. Dan Quisenberry had a really good career, but not a Hall of Famer. Move the cat again. Cat's going to be the star of the video today. I'm sorry about that. Jesse Orosco had a very good career. We got Tommy John, good old Don Zimmer, coaching the Red Sox at this point in his life. Please don't do that. This is complicated. I've told the cat during this video. Good old Reggie Smith. Ed Farmer, former broadcaster with the White Sox. Rod Carew. We're getting near the end here. Good old Craig Nettles. Carl Yastrzemski, which I think was the very first card I had for 1980 Topps. And rounding it out with Steve Yeager is the last card. So that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It's a very easy set to be able to complete because there's no short printed cards. You can still buy completed sets very easily at a very affordable price. If you're trying to get a high grade Henderson, that's where you're going to kind of have to spend a little bit more money if that's what you're wanting to try and do. But most of the other cards, aside from maybe the Brett and the Ryan, are not going to cost you too much if you get a high graded card of the Hall of Famers. Otherwise, it's a very easy set to complete because you're going to be able to find a lot of the cards in still great conditions, because even just as recent as like 15, 20 years ago, there were still tons of unopened products that people were opening up, including vending boxes, wax boxes, and cello boxes. So you're going to find a lot of cards that are in good image or good condition if you're trying to be able to complete a set. So hope you guys have a great afternoon and enjoy your week.